It's Brickson Diamond from the Blackhouse here for an intimate conversation with one of our favorite partners, Lionsgate, bringing in a conversation and discussion about how this leading studio is building an intentional and integrated roadmap for a more and diverse and inclusive film slate for years to come, both internally and beyond. We are joining you, all of us, from Los Angeles, and sad we can't be in Park City, but we want to acknowledge that Los Angeles is the Chumash, Tonga, Kiz, and Fernando Tatabim native land. With that, I want to welcome our guests, Kamala Avila-Salmon and Nathan Kahane. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm going to do a little intro to embarrass you both. And so Kamala is someone we partnered with for years, and I'm delighted to see at Lionsgate and added to that great team. And she's head of inclusive content at Lionsgate Motion Picture. Previously worked at Facebook and Google and started a career in the music business at RCA and Bad Boy Records. Harvard undergrad and MBA with a native New Yorker born in Jamaica. So delighted to have you here, Kamala, and thank you, Kamala, and thanks for joining us. Nathan is president of Lionsgate Motion Picture Group, which oversees all aspects of development and production for the studio. Among the films that you've seen that he's overseen include Knives Out, John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum, and many others. But we all know Nathan from his award-winning producing career, even if you don't know it. A producer, entrepreneurial, student executive known for films like Good Boys, Juno, The Grudge, Neighbors, Don't Breathe, and the Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle franchise. So we thank you for all those entertaining moments. He's launched 3 independent production companies, Senator International, Mandate Pictures, and Good Universe, and is an alum of Berkeley's Haas School of Business, beginning his career in entertainment in the agent training program at ICM. So he's traveled that road. So we know who you all are. We'd like to dig into a conversation about all the work that's behind that. And so there's no denying, Nathan and Kamala, what 2020 and the summer brought us as a nation and as a world. Moments of reckoning and discussion about race across the country and across all the territories that we all have impact on in every industry, including entertainment, and even back to this sort of town we call home, Hollywood. It seems like every week there was some new DEI commitment or hire from a film or TV studio. Kamala, your role was announced in October 2020, right? Tell us how you got to Lionsgate. Were you hired as a reaction to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, or what's the story?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking, and thank you for having us. So I think this is a very common question and something that I think a lot of people assume, which I totally understand. I actually saw this role posted the good old-fashioned way on LinkedIn. So right away, if you know anything about how studios generally hire, when you see a very high-level role at a studio just publicly posted, you're like, already this is a different path. Because usually you just find out, oh, someone was appointed. So I applied the old-fashioned way. And really what led me here was that as I started talking to the team, it was really the commitment that our leaders like Joe and Jen Hollingsworth, our COO, who I report to, as well as Nathan and Aaron and the creative team, there was just such a clear commitment to really drive inclusive change. And as I spoke to Joe and Jen, this was a role that they had been working on for a year. So it's one of those things that, it seemed timed to the moment, but it was really long before that, quote unquote crisis moment that the studio started to really think about how they wanted to bring in a greater focus on inclusion in our slate and be more intentional about it, and felt like they needed a real partner to help them do that. So I went through about a bazillion rounds of interviews, as one should, for a role that has such impact. And I'm so excited to be here. And while we talk a lot about what happened in 2020, our focus is not just on sort of band-aiding what seems immediately wrong, but really building a roadmap for years to come that has nothing to do with the specific moment of police violence or brutality, and really has everything to do with reshaping Hollywood, which is what brought me to Los Angeles in the first place.
That's great. And Nathan, you're not as new to Lionsgate as Kamala, but you're part of the newer guard.
Yeah.
For sure. There, having come with Chairman Joe Drake about 3 years ago, after, as we discussed, a successful run in partnership with Drake as an independent producer. As you think about your arrival at Lionsgate and your objectives and perspective, what made you want to go in-house at a studio, and why Lionsgate?
Well, definitely, I would say the biggest driver for me wanting to come into Lionsgate was as a producer of films that weren't Marvel films, weren't the giant four quadrant tentpoles. I was seeing a lot of my favorite genres of films move from the theatrical space into the streaming space under new Hollywood rules. And we should talk about Hollywood rules a little bit, because that's a little bit of what Kamala and I are trying to undo, right? Because the studios tend to make binary decisions about how their business is going to work going forward. And as we all know, it should be a lot more nuanced. But it was honestly, I wanted to be on the front lines of the fight for the theatrical business. And feel like Lionsgate was uniquely situated as one of the younger studios, as a studio that was less reliant on historical IP and more reliant on creating the next generation of franchises and film properties. That there was a unique opportunity at Lionsgate to be doing bold, original films that were theatrical and quite honestly, just fighting the notion that certain types of films only belong on streaming.
That's great. So thinking about disruptions, because you brought the word up,
yeah.
You're both there, and you're clearly both disruptors. We started this conversation, Kamala, talking about everybody in Hollywood is hiring a Black person, right? And so you're going to disrupt. You're going to think about audiences and about opportunities as folks tried to, in some ways, get woke in 2020. But what do you think is different about the way you and your team are thinking about inclusive content in this disruptive frame that Nathan so clearly played out and laid out for Lionsgate ahead in his engagement?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I was really clear when I joined that, for our leadership, like, if the work is to hire me, then I'm not the right person. If the work is to actually allow me and empower me to shift systems, processes, structures in Lionsgate that are going to allow us to build a more robustly diverse film slate, then I would be so excited. So, that early conversation with Joe and Jen gave me a lot of confidence that for them, this was not a box check. I think the other thing that's really unique about it is that the structure that we have situates me reporting into the COO, who reports into Joe Drake. And I think that's really unique because it allows me to kind of sit across the studio. A lot of times when there are roles like mine, they may be situated, solely in the creative team as part of the development, or solely in marketing in the form of a multicultural marketing lead, or even an intersectional or inclusive marketing lead. And really that's it. That's kind of their purview. There was an outline for what this role was meant to be, and it really was meant to be horizontally integrated. So, and they really allowed me to fill out that skeleton, and in terms of what did I think would be needed for us to have impact. So, I developed kind of 3 areas of focus. We have an inclusive creative strategy focus, an inclusive marketing focus, and inclusive business. So inclusive creative is really how I work closely with Nathan's team, as well as with the acquisitions team, thinking about the films that we're making. What are the stories that we're telling? How are we bringing these characters to life? Who's telling the stories? It's not just about casting. We're not just counting how many women or people of color are on screen. What are the stories connected to them? Are their characters fully realized? Do they have agency and empowerment? And providing notes to our development team and our filmmakers on those points. Secondly, on the inclusive marketing lens, that is really about shifting from a more traditional approach of general marketing and multicultural marketing to really understanding that in 2020 and beyond, we are talking about a country that is foundationally diverse and inclusive. We are talking about a country that is now 40% by POC. So that needs to be a part of our primary marketing lens, not an additional marketing lens that we add after we've fully baked in a campaign that we in our heads are earmarking mostly for white audiences, and then thinking about how we might be able to bring other people in opportunistically. Also wanting to shift even language of like Black films, like Black is not a genre, Latinx is not a genre, female is not a genre, right? We need to think differently about how we position. And so just knowing that a film is predominantly Black in cast shouldn't tell you how to market it. You should need and want a lot more information than that. And then on the inclusive business side, it's really about thinking about how do we greenlight? How do we value? What are the inputs that come in? How can we think differently? Because when we look across the studio landscape, though every single studio has different green light execs in place, you know, we end up with major studio slates that tend to have 1 or 2 films per year that tend to be predominantly by POC. So that tells us that there's something in the model that is making it such that roughly 2 of 15 or 20 films make that cut. So we need to really investigate, well, where's the bias in how we are eliminating films that don't pass that bar? Why is it that everyone has their own math and is getting the same answer? There must be embedded structures we need to disrupt. So I think being able to holistically think about it and being able to have my team be a part of the conversation throughout all of those different points in the pipeline really showed me that, you know, Joe and Jen and Nathan were really committed to not sort of potential change or the idea of talking about change, but really driving it. Doesn't mean that it's easy, but I see many different ways in which if I weren't situated as I was, I probably would not be able to really drive this kind of change.
So Kamala has seats at all the tables in her team. So, but that's also including the creative table. So Nathan, would love to hear about how that plays out for your team and for the creative side. And what's changed in how you develop and greenlight material since Kamala's team has come into the studio?
I mean, the change from my perspective has been transformative. It's not enough. It's not enough. It's never enough. We have more work to do. But what I will say is coming into the studio, I and a lot of the other senior managers in the group had really good intentions about DEI work. And I would say our execution prior to Kamala joining us was mediocre at best and problematic at worst, right? And I would say that since she's been aboard, it's helped turn those good intentions into tangible results. I think you're seeing the right skew amongst all of the measurables in terms of more women directors at our studio, more directors of color at our studio, more authentic representation in our films, not just representation, but like specific and authentic representation. I think that, you know, less embarrassing mistakes are happening in the creative process because the wrong points of views are leading those decisions. And so I would say that Kamala and I get into like really good trouble. We debate, you know, we are, the way I look at it is there's 2 important forces that both need to be achieved through everything that we're doing. One is quality and artist service, right? Because artists don't want to be told how to make their films, and that needs to be valued, right? And at the same time, there's this absolute need across our slate of films to make sure that the audience that we're making and marketing our films to see themselves in those films, right? So I'll say for myself, as a 50-year-old next year white male in the business, you know, who's been in the business for decades, this isn't the first time in my career where I've seen a push towards more equity in our business. I will say it's for sure been the most sustained. And I'd say a lot of that has to do with the right choices being made inside our studio and other studios. But also I have to credit the activists outside of the studio who've put a lot of pressure on studios in a really healthy and great way. There's now a cost to getting it wrong. There's now a cost to playing by the old rules. And I think that combined with making great choices within your studio, are helping us make gradual change in our business. I would like to say that our work is done. It isn't. Kamala constantly is disrupting lots of decades old institutional thinking, institutional fear, institutional bias. And she's doing it in a marketplace, a theatrical marketplace that's putting an enormous pressure around each individual financial decision. So I would say, like, there's extra burden on all of us to be making movies that are making money, because the theatrical business is challenged overall right now. But the opportunity to be challenged, the willingness to be challenged, the willingness to have the hard conversations, the willingness to be embarrassed and say, I can't believe I did that 2 years ago, and let's get it right next time. I think all of those things are moving the trajectory in the right way.
So I'm going to pander a little bit and also push a little bit here.
Yeah.
Because if I'm sitting in another studio, Nathan, I'm like, all right, these are the folks who have John Wick, Hunger Games, and Tyler Perry films, right? What more do we have to do, right? You all are doing those films and still say we got to raise the bar. I want to talk a bit about the bar that you're raising and to what level for the rest of Hollywood. You touched on it a bit there, but I want to crystallize that a bit, because some could argue that you have this long history of inclusive content. So what exactly else can you do? And so you talked about that a lot, but I want to shift it a little bit to what you expect from others, right? Through this work that you all are doing and achieving, what do you expect, and what sort of roadmap are you laying out for your competitors and your friends in the industry?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'd love to take that, because I think it's a really good point. You know, we're really proud of some of the big franchises out of the studio, but I would say, you know, it's still, in my opinion, mission 1% accomplished. And what I mean by that is that, you know, it's not just, again, about casting, right? Casting is one of the most visible things that we can see. And I join Nathan in thanking so many activists who've really called Hollywood out on like really needing to see more diverse casting, but there's much more to the puzzle. And I think we have to get just as obsessed with what's happening behind the scenes and what's happening inside of studios as we are what's happening on screens, because what we see on screen is a representation of what's happening back behind the, you know, behind the curtain. And so we have goals that, again, go beyond casting. You know, when I talk about what it means to really create inclusive content is content that is diverse and representative in front of and behind the camera. So we have very specific goals around representation behind the camera and what we want to do there from a writer, director, producer perspective. We've also brought in and developed our own framework of how we think about what an inclusive story is. And we look at everything from the creative team, how characters are portrayed. Are we minimizing stereotypes and tropes? Are we upending tropes and stereotypes? Are we gate opening? That's, I think, a really important predictor of progress and success, because it's one thing to say, I am willing to hire the Black actor that everyone else has already hired, right? It's another thing to say, I am willing to give someone a gate opening shot. I think we know that we as the studio system, we are the gatekeepers, but we sometimes forget that that also means that we're the gate openers. We can create opportunity. And so what I really want to see is, you know, other studios really answering back and taking this charge as well, and saying that, like, it's not just about casting, and what we've done so far is not enough. You know, we need to get to a place where the film industry looks like its audience, because once that happens, we won't need to be as sort of micro focused on individual predictors of success and progress, because once people are in the room, they will never forget to tell their own story. So my job is making sure that, like, I'm trying to wear many hats at the same time. But what I want to see is to be able to know that, like, I don't have to be the one to remember a queer story or this story or that story, even if that's not me, because there will be other people in the room. So another way in which I think the way we're approaching it is different and in its scope and expanse is that I also partner closely with HR and the diversity team and think about inclusive hiring and how we can make the studio better reflect its slate, because it's not about myself or even my amazing team. You know, I think I have one of the best teams in the business in terms of folks that work on inclusive content here, but it's not about whether someone from inclusive content was in the meeting. It's who's on the development team, who's on the marketing team, who's in distribution. If those people also become more diverse and representative, then we're going to meet our goals much, much more quickly. And we want audiences to hold us accountable. And through various social media platforms, we see audiences holding studios accountable directly. And I think that is really, really important to our progress. And so I think that if we can really think beyond what we can immediately see and think about what is driving everything that we're seeing and where are the different levers that we need to shift towards greater inclusion. It's not a goal. The standard of what is inclusive today in 2022 will be different than the standard of what inclusion is in 2032. And that is good, because in general, that progress is pushing us towards representing more and more and more voices. And we should welcome that bar being ever raised on ourselves as well.
So I want to bring it back to Sundance, because those are incredible standards to set. But there's a step before all of us, right? And that's Sundance. And Sundance has really, I'm going to give them propers. Give them their propers. They've done a great job about being inclusive, right? Over history. And we at Blackhouse have spent the last 15 years pushing to do even more, right? To show underrepresented filmmakers and stories. And the current lineup is fantastic, as the reduced number of films for the second year in a row has a significant number. We count almost 35 Black films. But you talked about it, Kamala, those folks who are able to be below the line as well as above the line on the creative side, and not just in front of the camera. But I'm curious, as you all drive this work and think about the pipeline and the ecosystem, is there more to be done overall on the front step of the business, essentially, with the really independent creators who we rely on festivals to surface and to bring forward? What's the call you all would make to festivals that you feel that they need to do to really provide the talent, the access to those of us in this room in particular, to do all the great work that you all are hoping to do? Nathan, maybe I'll ask you to start with your mandate to the festivals.
Yeah, I mean, because we're a wide release studio that is more a marketing driven exercise than the publicity driven. It's not too often that we are showcasing our films at the festivals, in particular Sundance. But Sundance is a place where we are looking every year for the next generation of talent. And you mentioned below the line, and I think it's an important conversation that runs parallel to the festival conversation, because the festivals are really about pulling people into our business, right? And they're a really great way to kind of create access to our business. But how else are we as studios creating access? And how are we attracting the best and brightest from places that we haven't historically looked? And it's one of the areas in physical production at our studio that Kamala has been really creating an enormous amount of partnership with our physical production team, with Matt Leonetti, to look at who are we hiring, what pools of candidates are we hiring from, where are we locating our film shoots, and how does that create access to more opportunities to bring people of color and women into our business. And those are all new trends, positive trends that are happening in our business. And as it usually does, it's usually creatives of color who take it upon themselves, because the industry needs that push, and historically has not really moved unless the creatives pull us. to create those opportunities. So you mentioned Tyler Perry. When you look at what he has done in the city of Atlanta, to create a really, one of the top production hubs in the country, high-paying jobs, super attractive. I think it's not a coincidence that what Stacey Abrams is doing in Georgia runs parallel to the entertainment industry, drawing people to the South to do those types of jobs. We are looking in Los Angeles. Where does post-production happen? Historically, post-productions happened in Santa Monica, West LA, areas that are primarily white. That means that the businesses that are servicing post-production are happening in primarily white neighborhoods, right? And so we're looking at how we utilize the resources in our home area, and how can we do things differently so that we can create opportunity and waves of attracting people into our business that we haven't historically done. We've also, as a company and as an industry, brought the wages up at the lowest end of our business inside our company, which is intended very specifically to make flying across the country from places that we don't historically recruit from more affordable. I won't say affordable, but I will say like the bridge to get to a start in the entertainment business is easier today than it was a couple years ago, because we are consciously thinking about entry pay as a way to attract people into our business that historically had, for financial reasons, just couldn't make that thing. And what happens is you end up with a bias towards people who live in and around Los Angeles, right? Because they're able to live at home during those formative years when you're trying to make it in the business, and you're not going to attract the best and brightest from across the country if you're making it so difficult to enter the business.
Makes sense. Anything to add on that, Kamala?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to touch on, because everything about what Nathan is saying about the pipeline and the shifts that we need to make, I totally agree with, both below the line and also amongst the future executive ranks. I think also just touching on the festivals piece too, I think that what is really great about what Sundance has been doing is creating various programs and labs to really, develop and elevate and accelerate the paths of underrepresented filmmakers. And I would just say, that focus is so important. And what studios then, the way that I think we can definitely take that baton and really carry it is kind of what Nathan was pointing to, is we need to be making sure that we're really mining those lists. We're really leveraging. We send people. We don't necessarily screen our wide release films there, but we absolutely send execs, both development and acquisitions, to go and identify who is that next generation of talent we should be talking to, and being really intentional. And one of the things that is important to me from an inclusive content perspective is that research. So I'm really looking at what are the pipelines of talent in Hollywood, and where do we need disruption? What are the outcomes that a successful Sundance film director or producer is having coming out of Sundance, and how does that vary? Because I think we need to know kind of where there may be breakages and outages in our pipeline that are unintentionally removing people from said pipeline, while we may believe that it's flowing. So I think that that is really important for us to take a look at as well. And once we know the information, it's not just about, okay, now I know it. I think that's one of the things that happens sometimes with statistics, is that people can kind of get to a point where it just washes over you. It's like, yes, another year where only 5% of the major studio films were directed by women. That number is not an action, right? Going out to get that number is not in and of itself an action. What is the action that we are going to take armed with data to actually change the numbers? And I think that's the piece that is really important to keep in mind.
So I'm going to come back to you. Thank you, Kamala. Nathan, pretend we're on the ground at Sundance. So hopefully at some point soon, we'll be on the ground somewhere and not all in our own living rooms or kitchens. Where am I finding you all? Where should I look to make sure that you see me and know that I'm going to be around at the festival because you're there to meet folks and see work. But I think about that, that's more tactical, but what's underneath that is more strategic. Once I've gotten you to notice me and to see my work and to think I'm interesting, what is that going to be like at Lionsgate? Is it going to be just you bringing me in to work on stuff that's already inclusive and the content that I already think about, or is there an opportunity for me to be working more broadly as a creator across the platform? And I think that gets this, if I can crystallize the question a little bit, how can filmmakers expect to work with you all, and how have you seen them react when you've instituted sort of your approach?
It's such a great question. I would say probably the biggest learning that I've taken and my team has taken over the last year of working with Kamala and her team is to separate equality and equity in the way we work with filmmakers that are underrepresented in our business, right? Like, thinking about equality is, I'm going to give everyone access, right? Equity is for us now, truthfully now, because this has been a learning process for us. And truthfully, we've partnered with our filmmakers to teach us how we can create more equity for them in the studio. It's oftentimes around learning from mistakes that we're making as much as it is learning from the good things that we're doing, right? But it's understanding how the system pushes filmmakers through, right? And understanding how that system has inherent biases in it, inherent processes that historically and generationally have created a real and honest skepticism about the studio system and how filmmakers of color and women are treated in that system. So we are thinking about that and talking about that and trying to change the way we work to make it a more equitable place. Now, in terms of the content itself, we talk about this all the time, and Kamala hit on it earlier. If you look at the generational change in our business, I would say that studios, when I started in the business, would have representation in the executive rank, but it would have no impact on what films were being made. There were Black and Latino, Hispanic executives working on predominantly white-centered movies, right? That was wave one, right? Wave two is really about thinking about content in terms of genre instead of audience, right? Instead of thinking about films as white films or Black films, thinking about all films, all genres of films, how we could make them more interesting by centering them with people that haven't historically been centered in films, right? So if you're a director of color or female director, we don't expect you to come into our studio and only make films for your ethnicity, your racial background. Like, we want to be working with filmmakers of color on whatever kind of films that they want to be making. Now, what we are seeing and what's undeniable is that when we hire filmmakers of color or women, we see this giant positive drag of impact across that film as a trend, right? You're seeing department heads of color, you're seeing actors of color, you're seeing producers of color, you're seeing writers of color or women, and they are doing the lion's work in terms of creating more diversity across all levels of the content, right? But when we think about how filmmakers can interact with our studio, it's really like any other filmmaker should, right? Where does the studio's taste and business align with that filmmaker's taste and business? And where there's alignment, let's work together. And where there isn't alignment, then we aren't the right place for you. So I would say one of the things that was really, really, really important about coming into the studio, it was what I call kind of like a one label studio, in the sense that all of our films were going to be released under the Lionsgate label. That wasn't how it worked when we came to the studio, and what it did was it created a focus that there was going to be a consistency in the budgets, in the marketing spends across our films, and for lack of a better word, films and filmmakers weren't going to be ghettoized in labels as had been historically done at studios.
I'm coming back to you, Nathan, because I still don't know where to find you when I'm at the festival. Where am I looking for Lionsgate to get in front of you all?
You're going to find Lionsgate executives watching every single movie that you can. So you're going to see people from Kamala's team, people from our marketing team. You're going to see people from the creative team, our acquisitions team, and we're all going to be there doing different things. My team is going to be there recruiting talent for the next generation of films. Who's making that great film that aligns with some of the scripts that we have, and how can we convince them to come make films with us? Our acquisitions team are there to buy films of all sizes and to give them distribution, theatrical distribution. That is a place where we are very, very, very active. And we have different distribution platforms within our structure to accommodate different types of films and different types of audiences. So you're going to see us mostly at the movies, occasionally at the bar, and just getting to meet as many people as possible. I will say Sundance has become a little more challenging than it was. There used to be a lot more access to the filmmakers for all of us than there is today. But by the time filmmakers are showing their films at Sundance now, they have agents, they have managers, they are being well guarded so that the industry can be filtered the right way towards whatever their client wants.
Can I add to that too? I think that just to take it very tactical, when we're back in an in-person world, I think it's going to be important for us to be showing up at the places where underrepresented filmmakers already are. So that's why we have relationships with Blackhouse. That's why we make it a point to make sure we're showing up where Color of Change is, where Macro is, where are the places where those filmmakers already feel at home, and we should be showing up there. I think also a big part of why it always makes sense to be really intentional about diversifying your studio is making sure that we have a lot of different eyes and ears open to all the different places we could be showing up. We may have some executives over at Latinx House. We may have some people over at Blackhouse. We should be covering all of those grounds. So it's not about them coming to us necessarily, but really us also going to them. And then to kind of the bigger picture strategic piece of it, one of the things that I'm very aware of is that part of what I would call maybe wave 2.1 in how Hollywood decides to change is okay, let's make sure that for films that center women and people of color or queer people or whatever it is, that we have those people represented in the creative team, or that those ideas are coming from them. And that is critically important. But I think to me, that's not the end of the discussion. It really is, we have for years empowered, men and a lot of times white men to tell stories about everyone. And so Black filmmakers need to be just as able to make stories about everyone as well, and be able to put together the right representative team to make sure that it is, depicted in the right way. And so I think that some of the ways we'll know when we have really achieved it is when, yes, Black filmmakers are prioritized on content that centers Black Black characters, but those are not the only lists that they're showing up on. They are also directing big franchises in Hollywood that are filled with people of all different backgrounds. And I think that's going to be a really important marker of progress. So for Black content creators that are listening and watching this and have stories that include people from all different backgrounds, I think that's going to be a really important area to continue to push our business. because we still sometimes can default to this idea that, we only need Black storytellers on certain kinds of stories. And I would raise the stakes and say there are no stories anymore that we can afford not to have voices of color and women weighing in on. And there are so many perspectives behind the camera. It's usually like, yes, there is one director, but there are multiple producers, there are multiple writers, there's so many ways that we could be filling up the canvas with more diverse perspectives. And that needs to be a priority in every movie, because otherwise you end up with women and people of color carrying all of the weight for progress in the industry on their movies with half the budgets. And, we have to get away from that as well.
Thank you, because that gets me to a question about obstacles, right? So, so I want to congratulate you all on the work you all are doing, because it is one effort, significant effort to move this big boulder out of the way, right? But Nathan, you produced so many movies over your career, both independently and now inside the studio. Just curious about, what do you see as the biggest obstacles to progress when it comes to inclusion and inclusive content and the agenda that you all have built together out in the world, right? What are the obstacles you all are still worried about that may not have been in the realm of your ability to impact today, but that you all are still eyeing and empathizing with creators around those things being in the way?
One of the things I'm loath to do is compliment our streaming competitors, but I have to on this point. I would say that our streaming competitors had an advantage over the theatrical players in their ability to access direct from consumer data. And what that data showed them is that there were lots of institutional rules and expectations about our business that were just fundamentally absolutely untrue. And those had to do with what kinds of films, centered by whom, play where, right? And we're talking about the people that are running those streaming platforms come from traditional theatrical medium. They're friends who at one point were unintentionally part of the problem, like we all have been, right? And so what the data showed them, and they share with us because the data is really exciting, is that all of those rules were fundamentally built out of kind of white dominant supremacy biases, right? And when the business case for authentic multicultural entertainment, I'm not talking about the Benetton ad movie, but the film that builds authentic representation that's very multicultural, those are the franchises that are the most commercial globally. And it's, on the other side of the institutional bias, and when you see it play out, it makes absolute sense, because if everyone sees themselves in a piece of content, they're more likely to want to go and participate in the entertainment of that content, right? Yeah, to answer your question, institutional rules are the biggest obstacle, right? And I would say that we're a company that constantly discusses those institutional rules, and we're also still burdened by them, right? We are aware of them, we debate them, we talk about them, we understand how problematic they are, and they still show up in insidious ways in decision making in our business, because the business consistently makes decisions based off of historical comps and historical data. And when historically we've kept large parts of audiences and creative communities out of our business, then the only data that exists is biased data, right? And so we have to constantly hold a mirror up to ourselves, ask ourselves, why? Why are we valuing this person over this person? Why do we feel that there's less risk in this movie versus that movie? And have those hard conversations consistently, because even for a place that is small enough to have these conversations regularly, like Lionsgate is, the power of that institutional bias remains. And without really actively working to upend it, we will constantly find ourselves backsliding into, quick, fast, biased answers.
I'll add to that because I think that that's so true. And a big part of the work that we are doing is about how can we make all of our executives more aware of what those institutional barriers are and how can we name them. So I've really taken it and made it part of my mission that like we need to talk about what's not being said in the room. So when we bring forward a director list, we need to not only talk about who's on it, but who's not on it and why. We need to say in the room, I don't believe that person is ready for a film of that level, so that someone else can say why, right? We need to talk about why I don't believe that that person can carry this film as the lead, so that we can talk about why. We also, we try to speak as plainly as possible about things like white supremacy, about dominant culture, about, artificial sense of urgency and how all of those things, whiteness as neutrality, like we need to talk about the fact that like, yes, this script does not name anyone's race, but you and I both know that when they wrote it, they had white characters in mind. So if we plan to go in a different direction, let's talk about what would actually need to change. So I think that one of the bigger barriers is that there are so many biases that everybody knows, but is afraid to actually say out loud because they feel as if, well, if I say it, I'm saying that I believe it and I didn't create it. I don't care who created it, and it doesn't truly really even matter if you believe it or you don't believe it. We are operating as if it is true, and we need to really interrogate whether it is true, and do we know it to be true by data, by anecdote, by experience? Is it just a thing people say? An easy one is sort of whether or not Black-centered films can work outside the US. That is one of those things that you hear again and again and again. It's almost passed down like on tablets to everybody when you come in. And I love what Nathan said. Streaming has started to disprove that. But also, we need to talk about why has that been the case in the past? Tell me about the budgets that were invested. Tell me about the outside of the US talent tours that were done to really educate them about certain creators. Tell me about all of the things that led to it. In order for us to really debunk some of these myths, we have to know, all right, what made us feel like it was true? What do we now know that tells us it's not true? Is there additional data we need to get? And how can we at some point decide that we are no longer going to be complicit in continuing to perpetuate the rules? We're going to actually push back in certain places, but we have to know that that's what we're doing, and put together a learning agenda for what are we actually trying to learn in taking this risk on? What are we trying to learn in going this way where my experience tells me to go this way? And make sure that we actually have a clear understanding of what that roadmap is, and bring our filmmakers into the mix as well, and have them help us understand what is the best way to make you feel supported in this ecosystem. What are the things that you have heard in the past that are maybe limiting how honest you're being with us right now? How can we get those out of the way so that we can really talk about what really matters to you, so that you feel as if you had a chance to tell your story with Lionsgate?
So this is my last question for you both, and it acknowledges the success and the perspective and dedication that you both bring and your organization brings to this cause and this urgent sort of mission. But I'm curious of what you want to see in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of where Hollywood heads, number one. But number two, what if I'm inside a studio and I don't have a Nathan, right? So just to be very clear, the language and the perspective that you shared, Nathan, and it corresponds with Kamala's language and perspective, and I'm sure you all do great work together, but the tensions, I think, between the way you all think and the way the rest of Hollywood thinks at this level, pretty high. Right. So this is not a conversation I think you can have in just any studio. So I'm curious as we wind down, what advice you all have for those folks in studios that aren't where you are, on how to move to where you want this industry to be in the next 5 to 10 years.
I think if you want to be around in the next 5 or 10 years, studios need to take on the charge that Kamala are talking about, or you're not going to be around. I don't think the consumer is going to tolerate what they tolerated previously, right? But I would give the same advice that I would give to anyone in our business, which is that build your business inside whatever job you're in, but also make sure that you are linking up with the wonderful networks of mentors that exists in our business, right? Find your allies, find your mentors, find the Kelly Edwardses of the world who are championing young executives of color and pairing them with people that want to see change in our business, and work really, really hard to make sure you have those people in your life to wherever you're working. And just know that I don't think Lionsgate, thankfully, is unique today. I think a lot of our competitors are changing and becoming more inclusive places to work. And if you look around and you don't see that change happening, it might not be perfect, it might not be where it needs to be, but if you don't see people actively trying to be part of the change, then you should be looking outside of that place, because there are enough of us that are creating the change in the industry that you deserve to be at a place that at least is making that effort within their own walls.
I'll just add to that, while I'm excited about what we are doing right now, we have not completed the mission yet. This is not a mission accomplished sign that we're hanging at all. This is the beginning. And so I would invite everyone at every studio, regardless of what level you're at, to think about how you can contribute to this. And I think it's very easy to say, like, oh, we just got to get an inclusive content person, or we got to get a different studio head, but there's you are there. What are you doing? And so I would say to everyone, mentor someone that doesn't look like you, promote someone that doesn't look like you, listen to someone that doesn't look like you, hire someone that doesn't look like you. And if in those 4 areas you say, actually, I'm falling down on a couple of them, what can you do in the next 6 months, and who can you tell that is your goal, so that person can actually hold you accountable for doing that different thing that you said you were going to do. It's January, it's 2022, perfect time to make a resolution and actually keep it.
Well, I love the mandate and the call to action you all have delivered for our colleagues in the industry at every level. And congratulate you all on the work that you're doing. Mission is not accomplished, but we are delighted that you are taking on this journey and really impacting Hollywood in the way you are. And of course, thank you for your support of the Blackhouse at the 2022 Sundance Film Festival virtually. And we can't wait to be back and have you in the room together with all our constituents very soon. So thank you both.
Brickson. Thank you for the work that Blackhouse is doing to just foster and support Black storytellers. We appreciate you.
It is our pleasure, and we couldn't do it without partners like you all. And we are ready to see what's coming out in the theaters and getting back to the theaters really soon. Thanks so much.